Again, welcome to today's webinar, Add User Sign-In and Management to Your Apps with Amazon Cognito. Our presenter today is Tim Hunt. Tim is a Senior Product Manager for Amazon Web Services, where he guides the Amazon Cognito team in defining and addressing developer needs for user authentication, authorization, and data synchronization in the AWS cloud. Prior to joining the Cognito team, Tim spent 3 years driving innovations for Amazon Simple Storage Service, S3. He also spent 2 years as a product manager for Amazon's retail team for mobile devices. Tim holds a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry from Bucknell University and a PhD in biochemistry from Harvard University. Today with us, we also have Jeff Bailey, Rachit Dal, and Pat Vyas, who will be our webinar moderators, and will be answering your questions throughout the presentation. Tim, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Tim Hunt. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. I'm really happy to be able to talk to you about Amazon Cognito, how you can use it for sign-up and management of your users and your apps. I've got a lot of stuff I'm really looking forward to talking to you about, and so I'm going to dive right in and start here with a summary of the topics we're going to cover. So I'm going to start broadly throughout this presentation and then progressively go into more and more details. I'm going to start giving you some context about AWS mobile services, the other services surrounding Amazon Cognito that you might be interested in, and then go more into Amazon Cognito, introducing you to the feature we're going to focus on mostly today, which is your user pools. I'll summarize all the features. I'll give you a demo of how you can quickly set up a user pool and start using it in the console. Then I'll come back and I'll dive a little deeper in some few areas that I think will be helpful to give you a little bit deeper understanding. I'll leave you with a page on getting started resources so you can see where to find documentation, SDKs, those sorts of things. And then we'll have some more time for questions and answers at the end. I'll be able to answer some of your questions live here at the end. So I'm going to pause briefly on this slide. We're very pleased with our developer community and all the great companies that run their mobile apps on AWS. They do that because of all the services we have that address the critical needs you have for building and scaling your app. So this slide gives you a summary of some of the key ones that I want to just make sure you're aware of, and there's others as well. But I'm going to start on the top left here with Amazon Cognito, the focus of today's webinar, and that's a great identity solution if you need to authenticate your users. If you've got server-side logic, we offer Lambda, and Lambda has really taken off as a new pattern of development for a back-end in a serverless architecture. So I would encourage you to pay close attention to that if you're building your apps. Another piece of Amazon Cognito we won't spend as much time on today is Amazon Cognito Sync. That allows you to synchronize data from one device to another. And then with your users, you can analyze them and track their retention using Amazon Mobile Analytics. So those bottom left two icons illustrate that. Now on the right-hand side, we have some of the media offerings. So one of the original AWS services, Amazon S3, is up there on the top right if you've got files or images, etc. If you need to deliver that media through a content delivery network, or you want to improve performance and experience for your users worldwide, we've got Amazon CloudFront. If you want to send push notifications, there's Amazon SNS with mobile push. That service also offers SMS messaging with global SMS service. And then if you've got more structured data, we've got the ability to store data in Amazon DynamoDB. And once you've built your app, we offer the device farm as a way to test your app on a wide range of devices and operating systems and carrier setups, so that you can give it a try on a much wider range of devices than you'd probably want to store and maintain and purchase yourself. So again, that's a big suite of services. There's a lot more of them, but these are some of the key ones that I want to make sure you're at least aware of. Now we know that there are a lot of services, like I just showed on that slide previously, and there are a lot of pieces to pull together when you're building an app. And so we've built the Amazon Mobile Hub as a way to help you get started. The Mobile Hub allows you to choose at the functionality level what you're trying to accomplish, and then stitches together the AWS services and configures them for you and gives you sample code and even a fully functioning downloadable app. So it's a great way to get started if you know you want to sign in users and you want to deliver some content, for example, and add push notifications. It helps you navigate all those services and set up some working code as an example to get you started. So now I'm going to start focusing on Amazon Cognito. And the first slide here is an illustrative slide to give you, or I'll use it to show you some of the bigger pieces, some of the bigger concepts in Cognito. And Cognito largely focuses on identity. And so we have in the center of the slide the mobile and the web app that show a sign-in screen where the identity often starts for a user when they're signing up for your screen or for your app. Then on the left-hand side, we're illustrating some of the authentication options, the ways that your users can sign in. So we've got social identity with Facebook and Google. We've got user pools, which will be the focus of the webinar if you want your own directory for users to sign up directly as one of your own users. And then if you've got enterprise identity, for example, with SAML for Active Directory, we offer that capability as well. So that's authentication on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're illustrating how Cognito can provide solutions for authorization and permissions to access your resources. So on the top right, we have some AWS resources in a DynamoDB table or in an S3 bucket. You can also use API Gateway or your own services behind API Gateway to manage those permissions. And then the last piece of Cognito I'll touch on briefly is the data synchronization piece. So you can synchronize preferences and user information across devices. So on this slide, I'm going to go just a little bit deeper and be a little bit more specific about the different pieces of Cognito. And on the left-hand side, we've got Cognito Identity, which has really two components that are important to understand. The left is, again, your user pools. This gives you sign up and sign in with a fully managed user directory. And then in the middle there is federated identities. Now, federating identity means that you're authenticating a user through another identity provider. That could be, for example, Facebook or Google, some other provider that's doing the sign-in, the sign-up for you, and allowing you to use that user's identity in your own app. So if you're allowing your users, say, to sign up with Facebook, or even to use your own existing identity system like Active Directory and SAML, you can use the federated identities piece to use those authenticated users and allow them then to get the appropriate permissions. On the right-hand side, again, we've got Cognito Sync. So Cognito Sync is a simple way driven by an SDK that you can easily provide the experience for your users that follows them from device to device. So if they have preferences or progress that they've made in an app, you can synchronize that across devices so that when they go from one device to another, they pick up where they left off. In a lot of cases these days, that happens when a user upgrades their phone. So if they move from one phone to another, they don't have to start off from scratch, for example. I like to use this slide to make the Cognito identity pieces really concrete, so you can see in an illustration what this means in terms of the user experience. On the left-hand side, we've got these third-party identity providers. So this is, again, the federated identity functionality. And it allows you to add, as you can see in the middle, functionality like sign in with Facebook. So if you're going to let your users easily sign in without having to create a new account, it's a low-friction way to get an identity. You can do that with Cognito through the federated identities piece. And there are, again, different identity providers that you can plug in there. In the middle on the left, we have user pools. So this is your users creating a new account for you, for your app, where they are going to establish a username and a password, and they're going to sign up and sign in directly now in your user pool or your directory. So that's that middle experience. And we also offer for a very low friction way to get your users to be able to start using your app, the guest access. So if you don't want to require them to authenticate at all, but you want to allow them to have some ability to get started, you can have them start as a guest instead. And then later they can upgrade to an authenticated user. And on the right-hand side, what Cognito Identity is doing is they're taking these identities from the left or that guest unauthenticated user, and they're providing temporary credentials so that your app and the user can access the resources in the back end at AWS or your own resources behind API Gateway. So it allows you to define what permissions these users can have. You do this by generating a role in IAM, if you're familiar with IAM roles. Gives you fine-grained permission for what each user is allowed to do. And then those are the credentials, those are the permissions that the users get through Cognito once they've authenticated. Focusing now on user pools, I want to emphasize a few points on this slide. And the first is this serverless authentication architecture. So as I mentioned before, it's becoming increasingly popular with the developers we talk to use this serverless approach where you don't have to think about managing your own infrastructure. You don't have to think about scaling your servers. You just think about the code and the logic. And in Lambda, the Lambda service allows you to do that where you just define your code and your logic. You don't have to think about scaling. And user pools works very nicely in that kind of an architecture because it's a managed service where you don't have to think about scaling or infrastructure. We run it all for you. It gives you an easy way to set up, sign up, and sign in. And it is based on a managed user directory. So this is an underlying platform that we've built that's simple to set up, it's low cost, and it scales to hundreds of millions of users. And then on the right, we're emphasizing some of the enhanced security features. So for an identity product, of course, security is very critical. So we've placed a lot of emphasis on that. We've built that on AWS best practices. And we've also provided some enhanced security features like built-in ability to verify email and phone numbers and the ability to use multi-factor authentication if you choose to. I'll go into some of the user flows now. We've got a comprehensive set of those flows so that out of the box you can provide all the necessary features to have users in your own directory. Those start, of course, with the user registering or signing up and then authenticating. And we provide the standard approaches, of course, like a username and password. We also support what we're seeing more commonly these days where users sign up and sign in with email addresses or even phone numbers instead of a username. These are users in your directory, so they have a profile and profile data. And you can also let users upgrade or update that information themselves if they need to update a phone number or email address, for example, or any other custom attribute that you want to create for them. We've got built-in email and phone verification, so users can verify to confirm their account that they do in fact own the email or the phone number that they've provided. We've got the other necessary workflows like forgot password or reset password that are built in, happen automatically. I'll show a little bit more about those as we go forward. And the last, as I mentioned before, we've got multi-factor authentication, SMS-based, which means that we have built-in functionality to send a code to a user's phone as another layer of security when they are signing in. So it's not just their username and password, but they have the ability to also provide a code to make sure it really is that user who's signing into that account. And as is indicated at the bottom of this slide, there's also the ability to customize these with Lambda flows that I'll describe in the next slide. Now, out-of-the-box functionality is going to address most needs out there, and that's really our intent, so that it's easy to use, easy to set up. But if you've got an advanced use case or in some way that you really need to customize the flows, you can do that using a Lambda hook. So this slide summarizes those Lambda hooks that we have today. This is more of an advanced topic, and there's a lot of documentation you want to look through. But let me at least highlight what you can do so you're aware of those and you know where to look. On the top here, we're showing the category of customizing the authentication flow. So this allows you to really change all the details of what the user is asked for, whether it's a username and password, or it's a passcode, or it's CAPTCHA, or questions from a profile, what have you. You can really open up the coverage here, and you can change whatever the challenge is and how you're going to verify it through Lambda triggers. The next is a set of triggers for the authentication events. So both before and after a user authenticates, you can trigger custom code to do things like validate whether or not you want to accept or deny the request, or perhaps some event logging for custom analytics. We've got similar set of Lambda triggers for sign up. So before or after a user signs up, you can customize the validation logic, for example, or after they're confirmed, you could send them a welcome message, or you again could do some more logging or any other custom logic that you need at that time. And then the last Lambda hook listed here is the custom message Lambda hook. This is one that allows you to, in very many ways, customize all the messages that are sent to the users. So we've got all these built-in flows like forgot password or multi-factor authentication that sends a code to a user. And we give you the ability to customize these because our intent here is to have all of the interactions with the user be yours, that you own, that you brand, and Cognito user pools is really behind the scenes. And this custom message Lambda allows you to do that in very advanced ways. There's also a very simple way through templates that I'll show you in a little bit, ways that you can customize messages. But again, this is an advanced way that's very powerful if you want to do some advanced customization. I'll show you a little bit more about that custom auth flow on this slide. So again, this is the way you can customize the way somebody signs in. So this slide illustrates that. In the first point, we've got the user from a device initiating the authentication. And in the second point, they're using a Lambda trigger to get the first challenge. That could be, what's your password, for example. 3 and 4 show the interaction with the user where the challenge is presented and the response is received. And then 5 allows your Lambda trigger to confirm that, or to validate that the response was correct. And if it was, 6 could be the completion of sign-in, providing the user with the tokens that they need then to continue with the application. Or you could chain multiple rounds of this together, and you could provide another set of challenges after the user has completed the first one. It's really very flexible, and you can build whatever logic you're looking for. Now, on the admin side, we've also got a large set of capabilities. And again, the intent here is to have us make it easy for you to set up a user directory, but for you to be able to own and manage your users as if they're your own. So we've got this set of capabilities to allow you to do that. So it can start with configuring or creating and then deleting a user pool, of course, those standard operations. And you can do that in different AWS regions. You can define the custom attributes for user profiles. There's a fairly large set of standard attributes, but you can also create new ones, and you'll see that a little bit in the demo. You can also decide which attributes are required. So if you want to make sure, for example, that every user has an email address, you could require email as a required attribute for a user to complete sign up. You can set app permissions on what attributes can be read or written to from an app. We talked about these profile attributes, and I'll show you again in a little bit an example of how you can decide which of those attributes each app can read and which they can write. You can also set up policies for your password and how strong you want that to be. You can customize whether or not you want additional security or added convenience based on what you think is appropriate for your application. You can then search for your users, so you can manage those. You can search as a full match or a prefix match on an attribute through the console or through the APIs. And then you can conduct operations on those users, like resetting their password or confirming them, turning on multi-factor authentication, enabling, disabling, deleting, and signing them out. So that's the set of admin capabilities. I'm going to go through in the next series of slides a couple of the features I want to go through in a little bit more depth. One of the ones is remembering devices. Remembering devices is really handy, in particular when it's coupled with multi-factor authentication. So I've mentioned multi-factor authentication. That's that process where the user gets a code sent to their phone to make sure that they really are the user who's signing in. And that's great for added security, but there's a trade-off in that it adds some additional friction for users. And so with remembering devices, you can give your users the ability to remember and trust the device that they've already signed in from, so they don't have to re-enter the code next time they sign in from that same device. But if they suddenly get a sign-in from a different device that's not been seen before, you can bring back that added security of the multi-factor authentication. You can also build in logic to associate devices with your users and provide specific requirements like a limit to the number of devices a user can have for a particular account. We've also got an integration with API Gateway and Cognito user pools. There is built-in support where you can configure an API Gateway, a Cognito user pool, to allow those users in that user pool to automatically be granted permission to use the API and API Gateway. And there's also an advanced feature using custom authorizers in API Gateway where you can add custom logic to inspect the attributes and the token values for a user and then make whatever business logic permissions decisions you want based on what the user attributes are. Now, if you've got existing users, we offer an import tool. So you can bring all the information of your existing users, usernames, and other attributes in through a CSV file, except the one thing that isn't supported is bringing in the password. So users do need to set a password when they first sign in. And that's because there really aren't any properly implemented identity providers out there that store a password in a way that's retrievable. So it's really not an option to get a list of passwords, and thus it's not supported to import those list of passwords when a user signs in. So when a user signs in, they'll be creating a new password, and one other thing that's necessary for that to function is that each user needs to have either an email address or a phone number, because we need to make sure that these users that you have imported are in fact the users you intend, and they do have possession of either the email or the phone number to make sure that they are the user who's intended to sign up and sign in from your imported batch. Now, coming back to this control over attribute permissions, this is one of the features that actually I like a lot. And it gives you that ability for each of the attributes. I have just a few illustrated here, name, phone, and a custom attribute. And for each of these, you can say for each app whether they're readable or writable or both. So in this example, you can say that the name attribute, the app can both read and write to, so the user can see their name and they can also update it. But for the custom attribute of whether or not the user is paid, we've locked this down in this example so that the app can only read that attribute. So you can give the user a different experience if they're a paid user, but you don't want the user to be able to decide themselves whether or not they're paid. You want to control that yourself through a process linked to the transaction, perhaps when the user is paid. So that gives you an example of how you can use this feature to control permissions on user attributes. We have another feature that we launched more recently, which gives you, as an administrator or developer, the ability to create new users in a user pool. So you can sign up a user, you can send them an optional customizable invitation message through email or SMS, and the users will come in with the username you provide them and a temporary password. And when they first sign in with that temporary password, they will be prompted to create a new password. So this is the tried and true pattern for signing up users in an account or creating a new account for a user. With this feature, we've also given you the ability to lock down users that can be created in a user pool. So in many cases, and as it's set up by default, users can create their own accounts by signing themselves up as a self-serve model to sign up for your application. And in many cases, that may be what you want. But if you're looking to control more tightly who the users are in the user pool, you can also configure your user pool to only allow administrators or developers to create users in that user pool. So you can lock down the membership in that user pool. Here's a few more features I'm going to highlight briefly just so you're aware of them. I talked about how our intent is to have you and your company and your branding be front and center with all the interactions with the user pool for your user. And another piece of that is the ability to customize the from email address or the reply to email address for that matter when you send an email message. We also have an advanced sign-in mechanism for administrator sign-in from a back-end service. Now in many cases your app would be interacting with the service, the Cognito service, directly through the SDK. So we have SDKs for iOS, Android, and JavaScript that make it easy through the SDK to interact directly and have your users sign in directly through our front-end APIs. But if you want to control that process of signing in users yourself through a back-end, we offer the admin sign-in feature that allows you to do that more conveniently with developer authenticated credentials. We also offer a global sign-out, so a user or an administrator can sign out a user from all the devices that they're signed in from. And we offer the ability to customize the expiration period. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the tokens that a user gets when they first sign in. But one of those is a refresh token. And the refresh token dictates or decides how frequently a user has to come back or how much time until a user has to come back to sign it in. So you may want to allow your users to sign in once from their phone and never have to think about it again. You may want them to come back once a week, once a month, and have to sign in again just to make sure that you're maintaining that level of confirmation that it's the user as expected. And again, you can customize that period based on the custom expiration period. I want to highlight a little bit of the feedback we've gotten from some of our beta customers earlier this year, and they emphasize a couple of the strengths of Cognito user pools that these developers were looking for. So first is Hixme. Hixme is a top healthcare startup, and their focus was on a serverless architecture. So I've talked about Lambda and API gateway and the way you can build your backend without having to think about servers and infrastructure and scaling. And that was Hixme's design and their priority. And Cognito was a really good fit for them because, again, it's a fully managed service. It scales automatically for you. You don't have to think about setting up instances or provisioning. It's all automatic, fits very nicely in the serverless approach. And then Asurion. Asurion is the world's largest device protection and support company. You might not know them by name, but they're the company behind many of the device protection offers that you'll see from major carriers. And Asurion has a very large existing user base. So they needed really a lot of scalability because they wanted to bring their millions of existing users onto Cognito. And Cognito can scale to hundreds of millions of users, and that scalability was really what Asurion was looking for. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch over to a demo so I can show you and make maybe some more of this very concrete for you, as you can see how you can set some of this up in our console. So let me quickly switch over. There we go. So what I've started with here is the AWS console to manage your account in many different services. And you can see there's a big cloud if you haven't seen this before. And I'm going to zero in here on Cognito under the mobile services. And Cognito has two parts of identity that I talked about. The federated identities piece there on the right-hand side with managed federated identities. So if you're bringing in an outside identity, you can get started there. But today we're going to focus on this left-hand button for user pools. So if I go into the user pool console, I first have a list of some of my pools that I've created in the past. And what I'm going to do is walk you through how you can create a user pool. That process, as you'll see, is pretty simple, and it'll allow me to highlight again some of the features and show you some of the options that you have. So let me click that, and I'm going to give my pool a not very creative name here to get started. And then I have a choice. I could go through the review defaults option, which means that the pool is going to get set up very quickly with the defaults, and you can go back and customize that. But if you're more of an expert user and you know what you're going to get, you can start that way to very quickly set up a pool. Or what I'm going to do today is I'm going to step through the settings so that I can show you all of those, make sure you're familiar with them, and go through it step by step. So the first step here is the attributes. And I've talked about the number of attributes that are standard and built in. You don't have to use all these attributes, but for every user, their profile has this attribute available to you if you want to provide a value. There's also this column of checkboxes for required. So you can, as I've done here, I've checked the email, or it actually starts as default. The email attribute is stuck as required, which means that every user will have to provide an email address in order to get signed up. You could check other things as you need, whatever's appropriate for your application. And then we have the alias column. And I'll come back to this again a little bit later, but let me explain that here initially. Aliases give you the ability to allow your users to sign in with something other than their username. So if you want your users to be able to sign in with an email address or a phone number or their preferred username, you can check those boxes, and the users can then use those in place of their username. We see that in many apps. It's very popular these days, as users might not remember their username, but they very frequently remember their email address. And that's another convenient way to make sure you get an email address for all of your users, which in many cases you'll want to do. Now, in addition to all those standard attributes, we also have custom attributes. So I can click down here, and as that example I've given before, I can decide I want to have a paid attribute. And I could add more if I wanted to, but I'm going to just click next at this point. And I'm going to go into the policies tab here. I talked about the ability to customize your policies for password strength. We have some defaults here that will give a little bit higher level of security, but you could, if you like, for example, if you want to really reduce the friction of users being able to set a password and the security is not your highest priority, you can reduce some of those requirements. It's really up to what's appropriate for your app. The next section here is whether or not you allow users to sign themselves up. I touched on this under the admin sign-up feature. So administrators can always create a user using the admin sign-up feature. But this is where you can lock down whether users can also sign themselves up, or if you're only going to allow administrators to create users, for example. You've got that option. And for those accounts, when an administrator signs up a user, you can decide how long that account is available before it expires. Now, in these cases, the user is going to get a temporary password. So what you're doing is you're saying, I've sent this temporary password to the user, and I want to know how much time I'm going to give them. I want to control how much time I'm going to give them to use that account before it expires. If I go on to the next step, I have the configurations here for verifications. The top one here is multi-factor authentication. So you can decide whether or not that's off, and so not available for any of your users. You could make it optional, so users themselves can opt in to MFA. Or you can make it required as well, if you wanted to, for added security, make sure everybody provided, or everybody went through multi-factor authentication. You've got that option. This next set of options allows you to control the verification that's built in for email and phone numbers. So with both of those checked, when a user provides an email or a phone number, we've got built-in functionality to send a code and allow them to verify that email or phone number. And then when you're using phone SMS messaging to verify a phone number or for MFA, you'll want to create a SMS role. The SMS role allows you to call SMS on your behalf so that we can send those SMS messages for you from your account. So now if I move on, this is the way I mentioned that you can customize your messages very simply through a template. So you can, for example, starting with your MFA message, you've got this standard message. If you wanted to add maybe something from your own brand or your company name, you could quickly edit the template, for example. As I mentioned before, you could do this in a very advanced way through Lambda triggers, but this is a very simple way that you can configure all these messages. So you can do your MFA messages, you can do your SMS verification messages. Here's your email. You can customize the subject of the email and the email message. And then if you are using the admin sign-up feature where you're creating users and you're sending them usernames and temporary passwords, we've got a separate set of templates for that as well. And if you want to then also customize the email address that you're sending the email from to, again, have that be from your own domain, you can add those here as well. Now, I showed you the device remembering feature, and here you can decide whether or not you want to remember devices, perhaps always, and whether or not you want to allow the users to suppress that second code sending, that second factor in multi-factor authentication. So I could turn that on for users as well. The apps screen here allows you to set some configurations for each app. And by app, what I mean here is these are usually the clients. You might think of your app as maybe your iOS app or your Android app or your web app. And for each of those, you can set up a separate app name. I'm just going to pretend this is my iOS app. You can decide how long you want those refresh tokens to exist before they expire. There's a secret that can get generated. You have some other controls here about some of the advanced features. You can learn more and find those in our documentation. And then you can also set the read and write permissions here. As I mentioned before in that example, you might want to have this user or this app be able to read all the attributes. There's also convenience ways if you decide that you want to take out the address or all the profile information. We've got these convenience scope options. But let's say in this case I want them to read everything. But again, I've got this custom paid attribute that I don't want the end user or the end app to have the ability to update because I want to lock that particular attribute down. I can uncheck this box here so I have that permission restricted. So then I can create that app, move on to the next step. And this is the list of Lambda triggers that I've gone through before. So for each of these, you can check in the drop-down box a Lambda trigger that you've created in order to customize any of the flows. You've got all of them there. So easy to use if you're a advanced user, or just to leave them out if the built-in functionality covers your needs. Once I've gone through all those steps, I'm here at the Review tab where I can take a look down all of my settings and see how everything looks, and if I want to change anything, of course I can come back and I can create the pool. I'm not going to create this one. I created one just a little bit earlier that I'll go into to show you one other tab that appears once you've created the user, and that's this User tab. So there's a couple of important things to show you under this. I only have one user here, so there's not a whole lot I have to display, but if I had a larger number of users, I could search for the user by attributes like name and email. I can also click on a user and see their profile information. I can enable MFA for them. I can disable the user. Depending on the user's state, this user is not confirmed yet, but I can change their state as well, depending on how they've started. And then if I go back, I also have the ability to import users and create users. So under import users, you can download a file with a CSV file with headers to give you a head start of the formatting to import the users. And then you can create an import job. So you simply give it a name, you give it a role so that we can log errors if there are any errors in your import file. And you upload the file through CSV or a CSV file, create the job and start it, and again, import your existing users that way. The other option here is to create users. So I mentioned as an admin the ability to create users. You could do this through an API or command line interface as well. But here you can provide a username. You can decide if you want to send them an invitation. You can provide a temporary password or allow Cognito to do that. Give them an email and a phone number, and when you create that user, depending on your setting, send them that invite. That's what happened as I created this John Smith example. And so that status starts with force change password. I'll talk about statuses in a little bit, but that means that that user needs to change their password when they first sign up. So those are all the things I wanted to show you in the console. As you can see, there are a lot of options here, a lot of ways you can customize this, but it also is, in fact, very easy to set up and get started by creating a user pool. So we're going to switch back to the slides now. I've got a blank screen. Can I use this? Okay, and let me keep going. So here are a few more areas where I want to dive deeper and give you some of the really in-depth knowledge that might help you in some cases. And this one is the user status slide. So in the blue boxes are the variety of different statuses that a user can have. If I go down kind of the center path first, this is the more common path, a user would start by signing up and they'd be registered. And a registered user cannot sign in yet. They need to confirm either via email or phone number, or you can confirm them as an admin. You could do that in the console. Or you can use one of the Lambda triggers. The pre-sign-up trigger allows you to confirm users. So once a user is confirmed, they can sign in, they can use your app, go about their merry way. You can also, as an admin, you can disable them. So continuing down that middle path, they'd be in the disabled state. You could re-enable them, or if they're disabled, you could delete them. So we've purposely made this a two-step process to go through disabled and then to delete. So deleting a user is probably not something that you want to do lightly, so we've provided that two-step process. And then on the right-hand side are some other paths where users can come into your user pool. So on the top right, you can import users. When they come in, they've got a reset required status, and that's so that when they come to sign in, they have to provide a new password. You can also get to that state if you, as an admin or as a user, have reset your password yourself. So reset password either from an imported user or a user who's had their password reset explicitly. And the way they get back to the confirmed state is by just giving themselves a new password. And then the bottom right is that admin create user, and you saw this in the console a moment ago where the status is force change password. That means that the user actually has a temporary password which they can use, but as soon as they've used it to sign in, and actually as they first sign in, they need to change their password and provide a new password. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about verifying email and phone numbers using the built-in functionality. There's an illustration there on the right of what the experience might be for a user where they'll get a code sent to their phone through SMS, for example. This could also happen to email. And they'll use that to, again, confirm their account and to verify their email address. It's a 6-digit code, and it's sent by SMS or email, and then it's submitted through the Verify User Attribute API. And there's also a confirm user sign-up method in the SDKs. You can send this through as well. If a user has both a phone number and an email address provided at sign-up, the verification code will be sent to the phone. So we default to phones as they're generally considered more secure than email. But you can then get the user, use that API to see if there's an email address that still is awaiting verification. And you can call the get user attribute verification code to initiate the verification. We talked about aliases, and this is the ability to allow users to sign in with something other than their username. So here's an example where you could give the user experience where they sign up and sign in with just their email and password. You can do that through aliases. You can check in the console, as you saw, what different attributes you would allow be used as aliases. And it's important that when you use an attribute as an alias, that attribute must be unique. So if you're using email address, for example, as an alias, it must be unique across all your users as it's part of the authentication. We couldn't have more than one user with that same email address. Now this is, I think, my last detailed slide. I'm going into the kind of the lowest detail here, but I wanted to show you at this level how you can use user pools and identity pools, both parts of Cognito, as well as other back-end resources, and how these tokens are interchanged along the way. So in this example, I start with a user on the left-hand side with, say, a mobile or a web app, and they're going to sign in through a user pool. So they're going to say, give their username or their email address and password. And once they've successfully signed in, the user pool is going to return some tokens. So I've illustrated here an access token and an ID token. There is also a refresh token, but these are the two that you would use for authentication or for further interactions with the user pool. And you take that ID token if you wanted to then use or get permissions for that user. You'd use step 3 here with that ID token and use the identity pool. Now with the identity pool, the federated identity is part of Cognito. What you're doing is giving us that token which says, here's an authenticated user, and we're going to give back to you AWS scope credentials. And you, as I mentioned at the outset, you get to define what the permissions are associated with these credentials, so you can decide exactly what, say, back-end resources you want these users to be able to access. And then in step 4, you've got those credentials, so your app can then use the back-end resources in S3 or DynamoDB or anything behind API Gateway. So here's a slide with some resources to help you get started. There's a link there at the top, and you can find this from our Cognito homepage as well, the developer resources link. There you can find getting started guides, documentation, links to SDKs, some sample apps. We've also got videos, presentation slides from those videos. We've got blog posts that go into greater detail for a number of the detailed topics. And there are also developer forums where you can ask your questions and have either the community or someone from the Cognito team give you some answers. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating or for signing in. I'm going to answer some questions here in a second. And there's also the ability, if you don't get a question answered today, as I mentioned before, there's the developer forums, both the AWS one, the Stack Overflow with the tag Amazon Cognito. That's a great way to get your questions answered going forward.
All right. Thank you, Tim, for your great presentation today, and also to Jeff, Rashid, and Pat for engaging with our audience throughout the presentation. On your screen, you will see 3 live poll questions. Please provide us with your feedback by clicking on the radio button next to your reply for each poll. We have just a few minutes left, but please feel free to continue submitting your questions, and we will address some of them, but we apologize in advance that we may not be able to get to all of them. So with that, Tim, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, so here's one question to get started. The question is it possible to use multiple clients in one user pool? So the answer there is yes. When I was in the console and I was creating an app with an app ID, or what you might also call a client, I might not have shown it, but you can certainly create multiple different clients and multiple different apps to use the same user pool. And for each of those, you can set all those settings independently so that you have, say, different permissions for different apps. Another question here is, can the verification be a link instead of a code? So I showed you the example of the ability to send a code to a user's phone or their email address. And the answer is yes, you could do that through the custom Lambda function that I talked about. Now the approach here is that you would build a custom Lambda function that would take that code and format it into a URL to a page that you would host. This could, in fact, we have some customers who do this with a static page, so you don't really need a back end. You can host this page in S3, and you can, again, configure that link to send a clickable link to the user's email, so they don't have to enter the code. They can just click that link in order to confirm their email. There's a question here about the pricing model for Cognito and for user pools. Actually, I'll tell you a little bit about both. For user pools, a user directory, we are priced on monthly active users, or MAUs, as you may know that term. So the pricing is on our page, or our pricing page. You can find that on our website, but you're charged for the number of active users per month. That means that if you have a user, for example, who is active multiple times in the month, you pay for that user just once. If a user is active 1 month and then goes away and doesn't come back the next month, you don't pay for them that next month. We also have a rather generous free tier with 50,000 MAUs each month are free. So you can really get started and you can launch an app and not have any expense or any fee from Cognito until your app takes off. So get started, develop, and don't think about any cost until you hit success. And you'll also see that the prices per MAU are on a tiered system. So if you're at higher levels of MAUs, the price per MAU also drops off. There's a question about what countries are supported for the SMS MFA. We provide this service through the global SMS service of SNS. I know that's kind of acronym soup there, but that's another of our services in AWS. And they're supported in over 180 countries. So there's a complete list you can find on the website, but it's pretty extensively covered. So there's a question about how long the codes are valid for the various codes that we send. So SMS code, for example, the code that we send for SMS is valid for 3 minutes. There are other codes like codes sent to verify email address or phone number when a user signs up, and those are valid for 24 hours. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have. Again, thank you, everybody. I hope that you'll find Cognito User Pools fits your needs for authentication, and we hope you'll give it a try. Thank you very much.
All right, I'd like to extend a special thank you to our presenter, Tim, for his time and a great presentation, and also to Jeff, Rashid, and Pat for answering the audience questions. If you have any comments on our previous or upcoming webinars, or suggestions on the topics you wish AWS to cover in future webinars, please feel free to email aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Your feedback will help us to improve our future webinar program. Thank you to our audience for taking the time to join us, and enjoy the rest of your day.